Raise your voice at my wife and our home again, and we're done. Those words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Our home? Let me tell you something about our home, because apparently someone needs a reality check here. That mortgage payment that comes out of my checking account every single month like clockwork, that's my signature on the dotted line. Those property tax bills that show up twice a year, demanding thousands of dollars that I somehow always manage to scrape together. My name at the top of every single one. The sweat that built this place room by room, board by board, nail by nail, the calloused hands that hung every door, painted every wall, installed every light fixture, mine, all mine. So don't you dare stand in my kitchen, pointing your finger at me like some insolent child, and tell me about our anything when you've never paid a single utility bill, never fixed a single broken pipe. I never spent a sleepless night worrying about how to keep the lights on. My name is Victoria Hartwell. I'm 53 years old, and I didn't recognize the boy I raised standing in my living room that night, his face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before, treating me like I was some stranger who'd wandered into his life uninvited. This boy who I'd rocked to sleep every night after his father died. This boy who I'd taught to throw a baseball in this very backyard. This boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, seeking comfort from the woman he now looked at with such contempt. Let me take you back to where this all started, because the disrespect didn't happen overnight. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, so gradual you don't notice until the foundation starts to crumble. It was 22 years ago when my husband died in that construction accident. 22 years since I became a widow at 31 with 2 kids to raise and a half-finished house that we'd been building with our own hands on weekends and evenings, pouring every spare dollar and every ounce of energy into creating something that would be ours forever. You want to know what sacrifice looks like? It looks like working double shifts at the hospital while your babies sleep, coming home at dawn to find your 8-year-old son trying to make breakfast for his little sister because mama's been gone all night, saving other people's lives so she can afford to save her own family. It looks like falling asleep standing up in the shower because you've got exactly 20 minutes between getting home from one job and leaving for the next one. It looks like learning plumbing from YouTube videos at 2 in the morning because a busted pipe doesn't care that you're exhausted, doesn't care that you've been on your feet for 16 hours straight, doesn't care that you have to be back at work in 4 hours. It looks like teaching yourself electrical work by reading library books because choosing between paying an electrician and buying groceries for your kids isn't really a choice at all. It looks like spending your lunch breaks at the hardware store, asking gruff old men to explain the difference between 12-gauge and 14-gauge wire because you can't afford to make mistakes when you're doing the work yourself. Every beam in this house, every tile on these floors, every fixture hanging from these ceilings, I researched it, I bought it, I installed it. With these hands, while raising 2 kids alone. While working jobs that left me so tired I sometimes cried in my car before going inside because I didn't want my children to see how close to breaking I really was. You think that was easy? You think I wanted to spend my weekends at Home Depot instead of at soccer games? You think I enjoyed crawling under this house in the middle of winter to fix frozen pipes, my knees bleeding on the rough concrete, my fingers so cold I couldn't feel them? All while Trevor and his sister were inside watching cartoons like normal kids whose mothers weren't trying to be both parents and both contractors and both providers all at once. But I did it because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice everything, and we do it quietly, and we smile while we're doing it so our children never have to carry the weight of our struggles. We work ourselves to exhaustion and call it love. We give up our own dreams so our kids can have theirs. We build foundations, literal and metaphorical, that our children can stand on to reach heights we never could. My son Trevor was 8 when his father died. Sweet kid, always wanting to help, always asking if he could hold the flashlight while I worked. I'd explain every step to him, how to check if a circuit is live, why you always turn off the main water before replacing a fitting, which direction to turn a wrench to loosen a bolt. He absorbed it all like a sponge, this little boy who should have been playing video games but instead was learning life skills because his mother needed an extra pair of hands and couldn't afford to hire help. By the time he was in high school, he could handle basic repairs himself. I was so proud watching him fix a leaky faucet without asking for help, seeing him explain to his friends how to change a car's oil, knowing that I'd taught him to be self-sufficient in a world that would demand competence from him. I thought I'd raised a young man who understood the value of hard work, who respected what it took to build something from nothing, who would always remember the sacrifices that had been made for him. Then college happened, And I don't regret sending him. Don't get me wrong about that. Every penny I poured into that education was worth it. When he graduated with his degree in mechanical engineering, when he walked across that stage and I saw the pride in his eyes, I knew that every sacrifice had been justified. But let me tell you what every penny really means when you're a single mother working multiple jobs. You see this bare wrist? I used to wear my engagement bracelet here. Delicate little thing, white gold with tiny diamonds arranged in a heart pattern. My husband saved for months to buy it for me, working overtime and skipping lunches, presenting it to me on our 6-month anniversary with such pride in his eyes. I wore it every single day for 12 years, even after he died, because it was my connection to him, my reminder of a love that had been real and pure and lasting. When Trevor's financial aid fell short his sophomore year, some bureaucratic nightmare involving forms filed too late and deadlines missed, I sold that bracelet to cover the gap. Didn't think twice about it. Didn't even tell him what I was doing. That bracelet went to a pawn shop downtown, where some stranger in a dirty apron offered me half what it was worth, and Trevor got to stay in school. He never knew the cost. I made sure of that. You want to know about working weekends? After my hospital shifts, after the house repairs, after helping with homework and cooking dinner and doing laundry and all the 1,000 other things that single mothers do while the world sleeps, I picked up shifts bar backing at this dive downtown. 40-year-old woman in sensible shoes, cleaning up beer spills and hauling cases of liquor through a kitchen that smelled like grease and disappointment because Trevor needed textbooks, because he needed a laptop for his engineering classes, because he needed to not worry about money while he was trying to learn calculus and physics and all the subjects that would build his future. My back ached for months from lifting those cases. My feet swelled so badly I had to buy new shoes. I came home every Sunday morning smelling like stale beer and other people's failures, but Trevor's tuition got paid, his books got bought, his future got secured. Every Christmas when he came home from college, I'd listen to his stories about his friends, about his professors, about research projects and internships, and all the opportunities that were opening up for him. I'd watch his eyes light up when he talked about thermodynamics, or materials science, or whatever subject had captured his imagination that semester, and I was happy for him. Genuinely, deeply happy. This was why I'd worked myself to the bone, so he could have opportunities I never had, so he could build on the foundation I'd laid for him. But somewhere along the way, I think he forgot what that foundation cost. The late-night emergencies, the financial juggling, the physical exhaustion, the emotional weight of being solely responsible for another human being's future, the emotional weight of being four, it all became invisible to him. It became background noise in the story of his success, something that had happened to him rather than something that had been done for him. When he graduated and moved back home, I was thrilled. Just temporarily, he said. Just until he got on his feet. I said, of course. This was his home, after all. I'd kept his room exactly the same, waiting for him, his high school trophies still on the shelves, his bed still made with the comforter he'd picked out when he was 16. But he didn't come back alone. He brought Delilah. Now, I tried to like her. I really did. She seemed nice enough at first, polite, friendly, always complimenting my cooking in that slightly condescending way that suggested she was surprised I could manage something so basic. She'd smile when she complimented the pot roast, but I could see her eyes scanning the kitchen, cataloging everything she found lacking, the outdated appliances, the cabinet hardware that was perfectly functional but not trendy, the linoleum flooring that I'd installed myself because I couldn't afford hardwood, but that obviously screamed low budget to someone who'd grown up with granite countertops and stainless steel. Everything. There were little things at first. Comments about how cozy my kitchen was, which anyone who speaks woman knows is code for small and dated. Suggestions about how interesting it would be to knock out the wall between the kitchen and dining room, create an open concept that would maximize the flow. She'd run her finger along my countertops I'd researched for weeks, saving money for months to afford, installing myself with YouTube tutorials and sheer determination, and wrinkle her nose just slightly, like she'd encountered something distasteful. "Have you ever considered upgrading to quartz?" she'd ask, like I was some amateur who'd never thought about design. Like I hadn't spent months researching every option, comparing prices, reading reviews, choosing laminate not because I didn't know better but because it was what I could afford. Like I hadn't chosen these colors and textures and finishes with the same care an architect would put into a cathedral, because this wasn't just a house to me, it was a monument to survival, a testament to what one woman could accomplish when she refused to give up. But I bit my tongue. This was my son's girlfriend, and he seemed happy. If dealing with her decorating opinions was the price of having him home, I'd pay it. I'd paid higher prices for his happiness before. Then came the minimalist phase. Suddenly everything in my house was clutter. The family photos covering the mantel and the hallway walls. Too much visual noise, apparently. My collection of coffee mugs, each one with a story, a memory, a connection to some moment in my life, was taking up valuable cabinet space that could be better utilized with matching white dinnerware from Target. The decorative pillows on my couch that I'd sewn myself during Trevor's sophomore year, staying up late with my ancient sewing machine to create something beautiful for our home. Too busy for the aesthetic she was envisioning. She had a vision, you see. Clean lines, neutral colors, empty surfaces that suggested wealth and sophistication instead of the comfortable accumulation of a life well lived. She wanted my home to look like one of those magazine spreads where everything is perfectly arranged and completely sterile, where no actual humans appear to live. But this house wasn't a magazine spread. It was a home. Every photo on those walls represented a moment I'd fought to create for my children. Every mismatched piece of furniture told the story of what I could afford when I could afford it. Every decorative object had been chosen with love, placed with intention, treasured because it was mine in a world where I owned so little. Still, I tried to be accommodating. When she suggested we edit the photo collection, I helped her choose which ones to keep displayed. When she wanted to rearrange the living room furniture, I moved the couch and chairs until she was satisfied with the flow. When she brought home new throw pillows to replace the ones I'd made, I smiled and complimented her taste while my handmade pillows disappeared into a closet like shameful secrets. I told myself I was being flexible. I told myself that change was good, that maybe my house did need updating, that perhaps a younger perspective would bring fresh energy to spaces that had remained unchanged for years. I told myself that compromise was part of welcoming someone new into the family. But compromise, I was learning, is only meaningful when both sides are giving something up, and as far as I could tell, I was the only one making sacrifices. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. I'd worked a 12-hour shift at the hospital. We'd had 3 emergency surgeries come in back to back, and I'd been on my feet since 6 that morning, running between patients, monitoring vitals, administering medications, doing the 1,000 small things that keep people alive. All I wanted was to come home, pour myself a glass of wine, and maybe watch some mindless television while my feet soaked in an Epsom salt bath. Instead, I found boxes stacked in my hallway. "Spring cleaning," Delilah announced cheerfully when she saw my face. "Trevor and I thought we'd help you declutter while you were at work." I stood there in my scrubs, still smelling like hospital disinfectant, staring at boxes that contained pieces of my life. My throat felt tight, and for a moment, I couldn't find words. "We've been researching minimalism," Trevor added, appearing from the living room with that enthusiastic smile he'd inherited from his father. "Did you know that clutter actually increases stress hormones? All this stuff has been making you anxious without you even realizing it." I walked over to the boxes, my heart already sinking like a stone in deep water. The first one was labeled "Photo Clutter" in Delilah's neat handwriting. Inside were frames from my family photo gallery, pictures of Trevor's first steps, his high school graduation, his father teaching him to ride a bike in this very driveway. 22 years of memories, reduced to clutter. 22 years of moments I'd fought to capture and preserve, dismissed as obstacles to better design. The second box nearly broke me. "Workshop junk," it said. Inside was my husband's vintage toolbox, the one he'd inherited from his grandfather, the one that had built this entire house. The leather was worn smooth from 3 generations of calloused hands, and every scratch on those metal latches told a story. Tools that had framed these walls, plumbed these pipes, wired these circuits. Tools that had been passed down through our family like heirlooms, because that's what they were, connections to the men who'd come before, tangible links to a legacy of building and creating and fixing things with your own hands. "Where exactly did you plan to put these?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, trying not to scream. "Oh, we found a great storage unit just down the road," Delilah said brightly, like she'd solved some complex mathematical equation. Only $60 a month. Think of how much cleaner the walls will look without all those picture frames everywhere, and that old toolbox was just collecting dust in the garage anyway. $60 a month. To store my own possessions. In a concrete box miles away from where they belonged. My husband's tools, gathering dust in a storage unit like forgotten relics instead of sitting ready in the garage where they'd always been, where I could see them and remember him every time I needed to fix something. And the photos, my photos, documenting every precious moment of my children's lives, banished to the same concrete tomb because they interfered with someone else's vision of how my house should look. "Those pictures are staying on my walls," I said quietly, but my voice carried a warning that anyone paying attention would have heard, "and that toolbox is going back to the garage." That's when my son who I'd raised to respect his elders, who I'd taught the value of family history, who I'd shown how to honor the people who came before us, looked at me with exasperation and said words that cut deeper than any physical wound. "Mom, you need to adapt. This isn't the 1,990 seconds anymore. Delilah has some really good ideas about modernizing this place." Modernizing. Like everything I'd built was obsolete, like the home I'd poured my soul into for 22 years was some embarrassing relic that needed to be fixed. Like my taste, my choices, my life's work was something to be ashamed of. But the real knife in the heart came next. We were standing there in my hallway, surrounded by boxes containing pieces of my soul, and Delilah said something sharp to me about being set in my ways. I don't even remember exactly what it was. Something about how I needed to embrace change or get left behind. How resistance to improvement was a sign of closed-mindedness. The kind of condescending tone you'd use with a difficult child, not with the woman who owned the roof over your head. I started to respond, to defend myself in my own home, to explain that maybe I had good reasons for arranging my house the way I had. And that's when my son, my baby boy who I'd rocked to sleep every night after his father died, who I'd sung lullabies to when nightmares woke him, who I'd sacrificed everything to raise present, stepped between us like I was the enemy. He pointed his finger at me, in my own living room, in the house I'd built with my own hands, and he said, "Raise your voice at my wife in our home again and we're done." Wife. They'd gotten married without telling me. Married, and I'd found out during an argument about my own belongings in my own house. No invitation, no announcement. No inclusion in what should have been one of the most important moments of his life. Just this revelation thrown at me like a weapon, used to justify his disrespect. In our home. Our home. I stood there in stunned silence while the words echoed in the air between us. 22 years of sacrifice, and this was my reward. Being told I was a guest in the house I'd built with my own hands. Being informed that my belongings were clutter in the rooms I'd designed and constructed and furnished through years of careful saving and planning. 22 years of double shifts and side jobs and selling precious things to pay for his future, and he was pointing his finger at me like I was some stranger who'd overstayed her welcome. I looked at his face. This face I'd kissed countless times, had watched change from baby softness to boyish charm to the angular features of a man, and I didn't recognize the person behind his eyes. This wasn't the son I'd raised. This wasn't the boy who used to crawl into my lap when he was scared, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard like they were roses, who used to tell me I was the strongest person in the world. This was someone else, someone who looked like my Trevor but spoke like a stranger, someone who could stand in my living room and tell me I didn't belong in my own life. I walked to the kitchen without saying another word. My hands were shaking as I reached for the cabinet where I kept my tea, but I managed to get the kettle filled and on the stove. The familiar ritual of making tea, something I'd done thousands of times in this kitchen I'd designed and built, helped steady my breathing. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd found at a garage sale when Trevor was in middle school, the one I'd sanded and refinished myself, working late into the night until the wood glowed honey gold under my careful hands. I wrapped my fingers around my favorite mug, the one with the small chip on the handle that I'd never bothered to replace because it fit my grip perfectly, because it held exactly the right amount of tea, because it was mine and I loved it despite its flaws. The tea kettle whistled. I poured the water over my tea bag and sat back down, wrapping my hands around the mug for warmth, but I couldn't drink it. I just sat there, letting the tea grow cold while I tried to process what had just happened. My son had chosen. When forced to pick between his wife and his mother, Between the woman he'd known for 2 years and the woman who'd given him life, he'd chosen her. Not just chosen her opinion or chosen her side in an argument, but chosen her completely, rejected me completely. I could argue. I could scream and shout about respect and gratitude and everything I'd given up for him. I could remind them whose name was on the deed, whose credit had qualified for the mortgage, whose sweat equity had turned an empty lot into a home. I could list every sacrifice, every late night, every dollar I'd spent on his future while denying myself basic comforts. I could throw them out right now, tonight, and be legally and morally justified in doing so. Or I could show them what consequences look like without saying a word. I chose action over argument. The next morning, after they left for work, Trevor to his engineering job that my sacrifices had made possible, Delilah to whatever part-time position allowed her to spend her days redecorating other people's homes, I drove to the hardware store. The same hardware store where I'd bought supplies for 22 years, where the old guys behind the counter knew me by name and always asked about Trevor. "Need some new locks, Vic?" asked Jimmy, the manager who'd helped me pick out my first circular saw all those years ago. "Heavy-duty deadbolts for the front and back doors," I said, "and a new lock for the garage." He didn't ask why. Jimmy had been in the business long enough to recognize the look of a woman who'd reached her limit. I spent the afternoon installing them, work that felt familiar and satisfying in a way that brought back memories of all the other improvements I'd made to this house over the years. Each turn of the screwdriver was deliberate, purposeful. I was taking back control of my own space, reclaiming my own home. Then I went into the router settings and changed the Wi-Fi password. They'd been using my internet for free, of course. Never offered to split the bill, just assumed it was part of the Our Home package deal. The new password was something they'd never guess. Build it myself, 2. I also disabled their smart lock codes. They'd programmed themselves into my electronic security system without asking, treating my safety measures like their personal convenience. Not anymore. By evening I was ready. I'd cooked myself a nice dinner, salmon with asparagus, nothing fancy but prepared with care and eaten without criticism or suggestions for improvement. I'd poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my recliner, the one Delilah thought was dated, but that supported my back perfectly after long shifts at the hospital. I heard Trevor's car in the driveway around 6:30. Then I heard the first rattle of the front door handle, followed by confused voices carrying across the evening air. "What the hell?" Trevor's voice sharp with irritation. They tried the back door next, more rattling, more confusion. I heard Delilah's voice, pitched higher with frustration. Did she actually change the locks? "She wouldn't do that," Trevor replied, but he sounded less certain than he probably wanted to. They stood on my front porch for 20 minutes, whispering and strategizing like burglars trying to figure out how to break into a house. I watched them through my Ring camera, seeing their faces cycle through confusion, anger, indignation, and finally something that looked like the beginning of understanding. Trevor called my phone. "Mom, what's going on? We can't get in." "I know," I said calmly, taking another sip of wine. "What do you mean, you know?" "Did you change the locks?" "I did." Silence on the other end. I could practically hear his mind racing, trying to process this development that he clearly hadn't anticipated. "Mom, this is ridiculous. This is our home too." "No," I said, and my voice was steadier than it had been in months. "This is my home. My name on the deed, my signature on the mortgage, my sweat in every room. Respect gets you keys. Disrespect gets you distance." I hung up. The calls started immediately after that. First Trevor, then Delilah, then Trevor again, each message more desperate than the last. I let them all go to voicemail, pouring myself a second glass of wine and settling in to listen to their increasing panic. The first message, "Mom, please be reasonable. We just need to get our work clothes for tomorrow. I have a presentation to give." The second, "This is insane. I have important papers in there, medical documents, insurance information." The third, "Fine. You want to play games? I'm calling the police. You can't just lock people out of their own home." That last one actually made me laugh out loud. Their own home. I walked to my filing cabinet, the one I'd bought used and refurbished myself when Trevor was in high school, and pulled out the deed to the house. Victoria Hartwell, sole owner. No other names. No joint ownership. No legal claim for anyone except me. I took a photo of it with my phone, along with the most recent property tax bill that showed my name as the taxpayer and the mortgage statement that showed my sole responsibility for the debt. Then I sent all 3 photos in a text message to Trevor with a simple caption, "Who's home?" The calls stopped after that, but I knew this was just the beginning. They'd regroup, come up with new strategies, find different ways to pressure me into backing down. But I'd spent 22 years being strong when I didn't want to be, making hard decisions when easy ones would have felt better, standing firm when everything in me wanted to give in. I wasn't about to start compromising now. 2 days later, they escalated. Delilah's brother showed up at my door. Marcus, his name was. Clean-cut guy in his 30s, wearing an expensive suit and the kind of confident smile that probably worked great in corporate boardrooms but wasn't going to work on a woman who'd spent 2 decades fighting for everything she had. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said when I opened the door, "I think we need to talk." I invited him in, curious to see what angle he'd take. I'd dealt with enough smooth talkers over the years, insurance adjusters trying to lowball my husband's death benefit, mortgage brokers trying to talk me into loans I couldn't afford, car salesmen who thought a widow would be easy prey. I knew the type. "Look," he said, settling into my living room like he belonged there, "I know families can get complicated, but what you're doing to Trevor and Delilah isn't fair. They're good kids trying to start their lives together, and you're being, well, controlling." Controlling. There was that word again. Funny how standing up for yourself in your own home gets labeled as controlling, while having someone else box up your belongings and redecorate your space without permission is called helping. "They just want to help you modernize this place," he continued, gesturing around my living room like it was some tragic example of poor taste. "Make it more livable, more valuable. Increase your equity. You should be thanking them, not punishing them." "Where are they staying?" I asked. "With friends," he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice. "But that's not sustainable. Trevor's already missed a shift at work because he couldn't get his uniform, got written up by HR. His credits maxed out from the wedding expenses. Yes, they probably should have told you about that. But young people make mistakes, and now they're burning through what little savings they had on takeout and emergency clothing purchases." He leaned forward, trying to look sympathetic. "Delilah's afraid to even drive by here. She thinks you hate her. She's been crying every night, blaming herself for coming between you and Trevor." "I don't hate anyone," I said calmly. "But I don't tolerate disrespect in my own home." "Come on," he said, his patience starting to fray around the edges. "They're young. They made some mistakes. They got a little carried away with the redecorating. But you're being vindictive. This is punishment that doesn't fit the crime. Family doesn't treat family this way." "Family doesn't box up family photos and call them clutter," I replied. "Family doesn't take a dead man's tools and label them junk. Family doesn't get married in secret and then claim ownership of a house they never paid for. Family doesn't point fingers at the woman who sacrificed everything to raise them." He shifted tactics, leaning back and adopting a more reasoning tone. "Okay, maybe they handled some things poorly, but now you're forcing them to sleep on couches, to borrow clothes from friends. Trevor's work performance is suffering. His boss is questioning his reliability. Is this really what you want? To destroy your own son's future over some hurt feelings?" "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm teaching a lesson about consequences. Actions have results. Disrespect has costs." Maybe if someone had taught them that earlier in life, we wouldn't be having this conversation. "So what's it going to take?" he asked, dropping the pretense of sympathy. "What do you want from them?" "A real apology," I said. "Acknowledgement of what they did wrong. An agreement to some basic rules if they want to live in my house." He scoffed. "Rules? They're adults, not children." "Then they can find adult housing," I said. "Adults pay rent. Adults ask permission before redecorating someone else's home. Adults don't throw away family heirlooms. Adults show respect for the people who've sacrificed for them." "You're being unreasonable," he said, standing up. "They're family. You don't charge family rent." "I'm not charging rent," I said, walking him to the door. "I'm charging respect, and if they can't afford that, then they can't afford to live here." He left frustrated, but I could tell the message was getting through. The reality of their situation was starting to sink in. Living with friends gets old fast when you're not a college student anymore. Restaurant meals add up quickly when you're used to eating home-cooked food for free. And when you're scrambling to replace your entire wardrobe because you can't access your closet, the true cost of your choices becomes very clear. Trevor missed another shift the following week when his temporary housing situation fell through and he had to spend the day finding somewhere else to stay. Then another when he got food poisoning from eating too much fast food and couldn't afford to see a doctor for proper medication. His supervisor called him in for a formal disciplinary meeting, warning him that his employment was in jeopardy if his reliability didn't improve. I knew this because Trevor called me afterward, crying like he hadn't since he was a little boy. "Mom, please, I'll lose my job if I miss another shift. They'll fire me and then what? I've got student loans to pay, and Delilah's not making enough to support us both." "Then you need to decide what's more important," I told him. "Your pride or your paycheck?" "It's not about pride. It's about respect for my wife." "And what about respect for your mother?" I asked. "What about respect for the woman who raised you alone, who worked herself to exhaustion to pay for your education, who built this house with her own hands so you'd have a home to come back to?" Silence. "What about respect for the woman who sold her engagement bracelet so you could stay in college? What about respect for the woman who worked bar shifts until her feet bled so you could have textbooks? What about respect for the woman who hasn't taken a real vacation in 22 years because every spare dollar went to your future?" More silence. "When you're ready to have a real conversation about respect, what it means, and how it works both ways, you know where to find me." I hung up. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of silence, of missed calls that I didn't return, of text messages that I read but didn't answer. I knew he was struggling. I knew they were both struggling. The mother in me, the part that had always rushed to fix his problems, to smooth his path, to shield him from consequences, wanted to cave, to unlock the doors and pretend nothing had happened. But I'd spent too many years being taken for granted, too many years having my contributions dismissed and my authority undermined, too many years being treated like the help instead of the head of household. If I backed down now, nothing would change. The pattern would continue. They'd be more careful for a while, but the fundamental lack of respect would remain. I'd learned something important in those 3 weeks of silence. I liked having my house to myself again. I liked being able to cook what I wanted without commentary on my ingredient choices. I liked watching television shows that interested me instead of whatever trendy series they wanted to binge. I liked having my photos back on the walls where they belonged, my husband's tools in their proper place in the garage. I liked the peace of not having to defend my choices in my own home. But I also missed my son. Missed his laugh, his stories about work, the way he'd always helped with the dishes after dinner. I missed having a family, even a complicated one. Then, on a Thursday evening that felt like any other, there was a soft knock at my door. Not the angry pounding I'd expected if they ever came back, but something tentative, almost humble. I looked through the peephole and saw Delilah standing alone on my porch. She looked exhausted. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, probably borrowed from whatever friend was housing them that week. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, and her voice was different, smaller, uncertain. "Can we talk?" "We can talk right here," I said, maintaining the boundary. She nodded, accepting the limitation without argument. "I owe you an apology." I waited, letting the silence stretch between us. "I was wrong," she continued, and I could see how much the words cost her. "About the photos, about the toolbox, about everything. I was trying to make the house feel like ours, but I forgot it was yours first. I forgot what it represented." "What does it represent?" I asked. She took a shaky breath, gathering her courage. 22 years of you building a life for your family. 22 years of sacrifice I can't even imagine. I was so focused on making it feel like home for me and Trevor that I erased the home you'd already created. I felt something loosen in my chest, just a little. "There's something